In a moment no one could have predicted, Hollywood legend Sylvester Stallone was moved to tears, not by a script or a scene, but by a handwritten letter from the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. What was inside left fans, media, and even Stallone's closest team speechless. This wasn't just celebrity news. It was a raw, powerful reminder of humility, humanity, and the unexpected bridges built through art. It began like any ordinary morning in Los Angeles. Stallone was in his home office, sifting through fan mail with his assistant, Michael. Most of it was familiar requests for autographs, old Rocky and Rambo posters, heartfelt notes. But one envelope caught his eye. Brown, slightly wrinkled, no logos or return address. Just a single line on the front. To Mr. Sylvester Stallone, urgent. Michael almost tossed it aside, suspecting a prank. But Stallone paused. "Wait," he said. "Give me that one." He opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a single handwritten sheet, neatly penned, elegant, unexpected. At the bottom, Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition Burkina Faso. Stallone stared at the name. Burkina Faso? He hadn't heard it in years. As he began to read, his eyes welled up. Silently, tears rolled down his face. "Sly, what is it?" Michael asked, stunned. Stallone didn't answer. He clutched the letter like it was something fragile, something sacred. Then, in a quiet, shaken voice, he read aloud, "Dear Sylvester, I do not write to you as a politician. I write as a son-of-boy who once sat in a broken classroom in the sweltering heat of Burkina Faso, watching a grainy black and white TV. That was the first time I saw you. You were running through the streets, fighting, falling, getting back up. I didn't understand English, but I understood everything. You taught me how to keep going. You made me believe I could fight hunger, war, fear. You gave me strength to rise. Today I am standing, because once upon a time Rocky stood too." Stallone stopped. Tears splashed onto the paper. He covered his face. "I don't even know this man," he whispered. "But somehow he knows me." Michael reached for his phone. "We need to verify this." Stallone shook his head. "Not yet. There's more." He turned to the final lines. "There are children here who still need heroes. Not the ones on screens, but the ones who reach across oceans. If ever you find it in your heart, visit us. Even just once, let them see what I once saw." With deep respect, Ibrahim Traoré. Michael looked at him. "Are you going to reply?" Stallone didn't speak. Then he said quietly, "I'm going to go." That evening he contacted his team and arranged a private flight. No press. No media. He said, "To where?" the assistant asked. Stallone glanced at the letter and answered, "Burkina Faso." When the plane touched down in Ouagadougou, the capital, Stallone sat in silence. No paparazzi. No red carpet. Just heat, dust, and children waving from behind airport fences. The man who once played Rocky was walking into something far deeper than any movie. A quiet escort met him. No flashing lights, just two black SUVs and a small Burkina Faso flag taped to the windshield. A local official stepped forward. "President Traoré isn't here yet," he said softly. "But he asked us to take you somewhere first." "Where?" Stallone asked. The man smiled. "To where your story began." They drove through narrow roads lined with markets and dusty playgrounds, past aging buildings. Then they arrived at a small clay and tin school. Cracked windows, faded paint. A sign read, École d'Espoir, School of Hope. This, the guide whispered, is where the president saw Rocky over 20 years ago. Stallone stood frozen. He hadn't even met Traoré, and yet something inside him already broke open. The school was nearly empty, just a few children playing, a few teachers cleaning. The guide led him through a narrow hallway lined with chalk drawings and old posters. At the end, a small room with no door. The smell of dust and memory lingered. A rusted projector sat in the center. Right here, the guide said softly, this is where they watched the film. No luxury. No screen, just a white sheet hanging on the wall. Stallone stepped inside. He imagined a young Ibrahim barefoot, cross-legged on a concrete floor, eyes locked on the flickering image of Rocky Balboa rising from nothing. No popcorn. No Hollywood. Just hope. Suddenly a small boy appeared barefoot and curious. He stared wide-eyed at Stallone. "Sus toy, Rocky?" He whispered. "Is it you, Rocky?" Stallone knelt down, gently touched the boy's shoulder, and smiled. Stallone smiled softly and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No," he said gently, "but I'm here because of you." Outside, the sun poured golden light through the window. Inside, the past and present quietly held hands. That evening, Sylvester sat alone in the guest house arranged for him. The letter from President Traoré lay open on the table, its words echoing in his mind with deeper meaning each time he read them. Then, a knock at the door. A young woman in traditional dress stood silently, offering a small wooden box. She smiled and left without a word. Inside was a simple hand-carved bracelet, and another letter. "Mr. Stallone, you owe us nothing, yet you've given us more than you know. If your heart allows, I'd be honored to meet you tomorrow. Not as a fan, as a friend." Ibrahim Stallone held the bracelet in his palm for a long while. This wasn't about movies anymore. It was about lives, gratitude, the unseen power of stories shared across ocean, stories that reached people who had nothing but dreams. He looked up at the ceiling and whispered to himself, "This is the most important role I've ever played, and there's no script for it." The morning in Ouagadougou was still, as if the city itself was holding its breath. At the presidential residence there were no reporters, no cameras. Just a simple table under a tree, 2 chairs. President Ibrahim Traoré sat waiting, calm and smiling. When Stallone arrived, there was no air of fame, no performance, only respect. They shook hands quietly. "You're not what I expected," Stallone said with a small laugh. Traoré replied warmly, "Neither are you." They sat. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that only exists when two people truly understand one another. "I watched Rocky when I had nothing," Traoré said. "It made me feel strong, like I could fight for something better." Stallone nodded, eyes soft. "I made that film when I had nothing too. 2 lives, 2 worlds, one story that lit a fire in both." Then President Traoré placed a 3rd chair between them. "What's this for?" Stallone asked. Traoré smiled. "For every child who's ever felt unseen." After their quiet conversation, the president handed Stallone a sealed brown envelope. "Read it alone," he said gently. That evening, Stallone sat on the edge of his bed. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside were letters, some neatly written, others messy, some with little drawings in the corners. They were from orphans, school children, and boys who once felt invisible. "Dear Rocky, I run like you before school because it makes me feel alive. You punch the bad men. I want to punch hunger. Thank you. President Traoré says you're his brother. That means you're our uncle." Tears slid down Stallone's cheeks before he realized they had started. These weren't fan letters. They were thank you notes from children who had been given hope by a movie, and by a president who never forgot what it meant. One paper held a single sentence scribbled in shaky handwriting. "When I'm scared, I remember Rocky got up." Stallone folded that one carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "I'm not the hero here," he whispered. "These kids are." The next day he asked to meet the children in person. President Traoré simply nodded. They drove to a small compound at the edge of the city, nothing glamorous, but alive with energy. Children ran barefoot across the dust, shouting, laughing, singing. When Stallone stepped from the car, they didn't scream his name. They didn't ask for autographs. They hugged him. One little girl took his hand, placed a broken toy in his palm, and whispered, "For you." She smiled, shy and proud. He held the toy like treasure. A boy climbed onto his back, giggling. President Traoré watched from a distance, pride in his eyes. "They don't see a celebrity," he said. "They see someone who never gave up." In that moment, surrounded by dust, joy, and the sound of bare feet, Stallone understood. This wasn't about him. It was about every child who believed the world could change, even just a little, because of kindness, courage, and a story. As he turned to leave, one boy ran up to him, cupped his hands around Stallone's ear, and whispered something only the two of them would ever know. Whatever the boy said, it made Stallone cry again. But this time they were tears of hope. That night, back at the guest house, Stallone couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, haunted, not by pain, but by joy, by the faces of those children, their innocence, their strength. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant in L.A. "The press is asking where you are. TMZ says you're filming. Should we tell them the truth?" Stallone didn't reply. He opened his notebook and began to write, not a script, not a speech, just a letter. That night, Stallone sat alone and began to write not a speech, not a script, but a letter to himself. He wrote about the guilt, about the years he spent surrounded by comfort, unaware of what true survival looked like. He wrote of President Ibrahim Traoré's humility, how one man, with almost nothing, had done more for his people than Hollywood had with billions. And finally, he wrote, "I came here thinking I was famous, but now I'm just beginning to understand what it means to be human." When he finished, he folded the letter and placed it gently on the knitstand. Then he knelt beside the bed, not for himself, not for his career, but for the children still running barefoot through dust, with broken shoes and unbroken dreams. The next morning, President Traoré invited Stallone to a quiet gathering under a large baobab tree. No cameras, no microphones, just a few teachers, a nurse, and 4 recently rescued orphans. Traoré stood holding a small wooden box. He looked first at the children, then at Stallone. "This man gave me courage when I was just a boy," he said. "Today I want to give something back, not only to him, but to every child in Burkina Faso." He opened the box. Inside were blueprints and hand-drawn sketches for a film and storytelling academy to be built near the school where Traoré first watched Rocky. Stallone's mouth fell open. "It won't be fancy," Traoré said, smiling, "but it will be ours. A place where our children can tell their stories and believe they matter." One of the little girls clapped in joy. Stallone stood slowly, eyes brimming. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. Traoré smiled. "Say nothing. Just promise you'll help us build it." Stallone placed a hand on his chest. "With everything I've got." And just like that, a new chapter in both of their lives began. Later that afternoon, Traoré took Stallone on an unannounced visit to a building he hadn't noticed before. Simple, freshly painted. The sign outside read, "Maison de Resilience, House of Resilience. This is where we help children who've lost their families to war, sickness, or poverty," Traoré explained gently. Inside, the walls were painted with colorful images: lions, warriors, smiling suns. Soft music played. In one room, 10 children sat in a circle, sharing stories. A boy no older than 7 spoke quietly. "When my village was attacked, I hid for 2 days. I thought I would die." Another child reached for his hand and whispered, "But you didn't. You're a fighter, like Rocky." Stallone's throat tightened. A nurse leaned in and whispered, "They know who you are." Traoré nodded with quiet pride. "Your story reached places you never imagined." One little girl ran up with a drawing Stallone with boxing gloves and angel wings. "I drew you as a protector," she said. Stallone dropped to one knee, eyes glistening. He hugged her tightly. "I think you're the real protector," he whispered. Back in the capital, Stallone and Traoré sat side by side for a quiet live interview on national television. "It wasn't meant to be dramatic," the host said. "It was meant to be a message." When asked what brought him to Burkina Faso, Stallone paused, took a deep breath. "A letter," he said, "and something bigger than fame." Then, on live TV, he held up the little girl's drawing, the one with the angel wings. "I came here to meet a president," he said, voice shaking, "but I found a family. I've acted in films for over 40 years. I've won awards. I've heard crowds scream my name." He paused, his voice cracked. "But I've never felt this kind of love." He couldn't speak further. Traoré gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's because here we don't love people for being stars. We love them for their hearts." Across the nation and eventually across the world, millions watched as a Hollywood legend cried. Not from pain, but from overwhelming human connection. That night, President Traoré did something unexpected. He took Stallone to the house where he had grown up, not the presidential villa. A humble home tucked into the dusty back streets of Ouagadougou. No guards, no cameras. Just 2 men on wooden stools under the stars. "My mother used to sit right here," Traoré said softly. "She'd pray for rain." Stallone looked around, taking it all in. "You grew up here?" "We didn't have much," Traoré nodded, "but we had courage." That was enough. They ate simple rice and grilled chicken, laughing between bites. "People think presidents and actors live different lives," Traoré said. But I think we're all just boys trying to protect what we love." Stallone looked up at the stars. "You know what this feels like?" "A scene from a movie I never got to make," Stallone said quietly. Traoré smiled. "Maybe now you will." There were no red carpets, no golden trophies, just two souls sitting in silence, speaking of pain, love, struggle, and hope. In that still moment, the world felt smaller, safer, and maybe even stronger. On the final morning of Stallone's visit, just before his flight, President Traoré handed him a small wooden box. "Open it when you're back in America," he said with a knowing look. Stallone boarded the plane, heart full, soul stirred. 12 hours later, in his Los Angeles home, he sat on the couch and opened the box. Inside, a folded Burkina Faso flag, stitched with the signatures of children. A handwritten note. "You came as a stranger. You left as family. You will always have a home in Burkina Faso." There was also a small golden pin, carved with a lion beneath a rising sun. Stallone froze. He knew that symbol. It was reserved for national heroes. His hands trembled. He hadn't expected this, not from a president, not from a country he barely knew. He walked outside, looked up at the stars, so different from those above Ouagadougou, yet suddenly familiar. As tears ran down his face, he whispered to the night, "This is the most important role I've ever played. Being human." He didn't need applause. He had found something far greater, belonging. But 2 hours into the flight, Stallone had felt it, a restlessness. Not guilt, purpose left unfinished. He held the note in his hand. Something inside him stirred. He rang the flight attendant. "Can this plane return to Burkina Faso?" he asked softly. The captain was stunned, but Stallone insisted. "I left too quickly. I need one more day, just one." After a few urgent calls, clearance was granted. President Traoré was in a village, speaking with local farmers about a new water project, when he got the call. He smiled and said softly, "I knew he'd come back." When the plane landed, Stallone stepped off in his travel clothes. No press, no cameras, just conviction. "I don't want to just lend my name to the Storytelling Academy," he said. "I want to build it. I'll bring filmmakers, teachers, equipment, real investment." Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just return to Burkina Faso. You returned to yourself." And for the first time in years, Stallone felt fully alive. The next day, Traoré organized a small ceremony. Not for media, but for the children. But word had spread. People live-streamed from rooftops. Journalists gathered quietly, at a distance. Social media lit up like a storm. On a simple wooden stage, surrounded by barefoot children, President Traoré introduced him. Once, he taught, used to fight through a screen. Today he teaches us to believe face to face. Stallone stepped forward, visibly emotional. "I've played heroes. I've trained. I've bled for movies. But I've never felt the weight of real purpose. Now." He held up a child's drawing. "I came here because of a letter, a simple letter, and in it the president wrote something I will never forget." He paused. "Mr. Stallone, we don't need your fame. We need your faith in us." He looked at the children's eyes full of light, scars, hope. "And now I give it to you, all of it." Children wept. Mothers clapped. Even hardened soldiers wiped away tears. And the world watched a man surrender pride for something greater. Humanity. Back in Los Angeles, weeks later, Stallone did something no one expected. He posted the full contents of Traoré's original letter online. It read, "Dear Sylvester, I was once a child in a war-torn village, scared and forgotten. One day I watched a dusty copy of Rocky. You were bruised, bloodied, but you got up. You reminded me to fight. I became a soldier, then a leader. Not because I was fearless, but because I had hope. That hope came from you. Today I ask not for charity, but for solidarity. Come meet the children who still carry that same fight. Come see that your purpose is still unfolding." The post went viral. 300 million views in just 2 days. World leaders responded. UNICEF pledged funding. African filmmakers wrote letters of gratitude. And the internet, so often divided, was united. Not by celebrity, but by compassion. Dear viewer, if you've made it this far, I want to ask you something personal. Did this story move you? Did it remind you that fame is nothing compared to kindness? If yes, like this video, subscribe. But more than that, tell me in the comments, what would you do if you received a letter like that? Let's start a chain of empathy, because somewhere someone is still waiting for a sign that they matter. And maybe your comment could be that sign. Thank you for crying with us. Thank you for feeling.